Hey, what's up guys? 104th Maverick checking in with another video. This time I wanted to share with you guys a couple of great tips that I got to really help me out to get some Hellfires off the aircraft when working with George AI in the front seat and get out there and start shacking some bad guys. So if you were like me and you were having some issues getting George to work, I hope following these steps will help you out as much as it did for me. Alright, here we are about 6.5 clicks away from the target area where I've placed 4 tanks on the runway for target practice. You can also see down here on the TSD that we are 6.4 kilometers from waypoint 1, which is our target location. So the very first thing we're going to do is bring up the George AI helper interface by pressing the button that we have bound for it, and on my setup it is the delete key. This will then bring up the George interface in the bottom right of our screen. Now to select the Hellfire missile, all we do is press the George AI Helper Interface left button, which is defaulted to A for Alpha on your keyboard, and he will confirm that the Hellfire is selected. It is important that we now confirm that Lock On Before Launch LOBL is selected, and the trajectory is set to DIR for direct. Now go down to your vid page on either of the MFDs and select CPG Site on the right hand side, and then box TADS in the top corner. Then we want to select Z on the left hand side for the zoomed view. So in case you missed that, it's the vid page, select CPG Site, then box TADS at the top and select Z for zoomed on the left hand side. And just a quick note at this stage, you'll only be able to box TADS on the top corner there if you already have the Hellfire selected, which is why I said it was important to make sure that we get George to select the Hellfire first before we go into the vid display page. So now what will happen is when we ask George to find and lock a target, we will not only get symbology up front on the iHads to show us where the target is that he is looking at, but it will also show us a zoomed in view of the target on the MFD. To find and lock a target, we simply place our iHads line of sight reticule, the little cross in the middle, over the area where we want to search for a target, and then simply press the George AI Helper Interface Up key, which is defaulted to W for whiskey on your keyboard. Now George will search that area for targets, and if he finds anything, he will look at it, and you'll notice two things. First of all, we get a list of targets on the left hand side, which I'll cover in a moment, but most importantly, we now get a dashed cross on our iHads to show us where George is looking. So we see we have our cross, which is our line of sight reticule, and next to it we also have George's. This is incredibly useful as it makes it much easier for us to line up the aircraft properly on the target that George is looking at to be able to fire the weapon. To select targets from the list on the left, all we have to do is press the George AI Helper Interface Up and Down keys, which are defaulted to W for whiskey and S for Sierra on your keyboard, and we can select different targets this way. You'll also notice that when we do so, the cross on the iHads moves position to show you where the new target is located, and we can also see the feed from the vid display move around as we select different targets. So let's say we want to attack the first target, Tank 1 in the list. All we do is simply press the George AI Helper Interface Right key, which is defaulted to D for Delta on your keyboard, and George will confirm that he is targeted and lasing that target.
Lased and stored.
And if we zoom in on the display here, we can see that we have the X line over the target to indicate that our laser is firing, and we can even see the tank on the display. And after a few seconds, as long as we are in range, we will see a solid box on our iHads to indicate that all firing parameters have been met and we can launch the weapon. We can also see the laser range on the MFD to confirm that we are in range, and in this case it is 6,348 meters. Now all we need to do is press the Consent to Fire button from the George AI Helper menu, and George will let it rip with the Hellfire.
Firing.
Rifle. It's important at this stage after we've fired the weapon to try and keep the aircraft as smooth as possible so George can keep a good laser fix on the target. I found that if you're a little bit all over the place, the weapon can easily miss what we're trying to shoot at. Shack.
Target destroyed.
Alright, to select another target, again we simply move our line of sight reticle back to the area we want to scan and press the George AI Helper Interface Up button, which is defaulted to W for whiskey on the keyboard, and George will look again in that area for targets.
And
Let's target tank number 3 in the list by pressing the S for Sierra key on our keyboard to scroll down the target list, and select it by pressing the D for Delta key for the George AI Interface Right button. We will then see that George snaps to that target, confirms that it is lased, and the display will be put up on the MFD with a zoomed in view. So once we have the solid box again up on front on iHads, we press the consent to fire button and George will engage.
Roger, engaging.
Rifle. Shack.
Target destroyed.
So again, we're going to look at the area we want to search with our line of sight reticule by pressing W on the keyboard for the George AI Helper Interface Up button, and select the target that we want on the list, in this case tank number 2, by simply pressing D for Delta on the keyboard for the George AI Helper Interface Right button to select the target, and when we get the solid box on our iHads, we can give George consent to fire. Now you'll notice that it can take a little moment for the solid box to appear on the screen to confirm that we can fire. If we see a dashed box instead of a solid one, it means that some of the firing parameters have not been met yet, as we are either out of gimbal limits, out of range, or the aircraft is just not ready to fire. Now that we have a solid box up, we can go ahead and give George consent to fire.
Firing.
Rifle. Shack.
Target destroyed.
Okay, for the last target, again we're going to place our reticule over where we want to search and press W to start searching. And you'll notice that this time no target list comes up because George can only find one target. Now in this case, it's always a good idea to make sure you zoom right into the vid page to see just what it is that George is locked onto before you fire, and confirm that it's something that we actually want to shoot at, and we can see here that it is indeed an enemy tank and not a school bus. So we have a solid box up front. Now we can press consent to fire and George will fire.
Engaging.
Rifle. Jacking them up.
Target destroyed.
Alright guys, I hope this helps. Please like the video if you enjoyed it or you learned something. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not claiming to be an expert or anything here. I just wanted to pass on some friendly hints that really helped me out to anyone else that may be struggling to use the Hellfires with George. I hope some of you guys find it useful. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with more Apache goodness coming out in the future, and I'll catch you in the next video. Top Gun and Volleyball. I'm not Scott Manley. Fly safe.